looks like the Russian president has returned to a medieval mindset in wanting to recreate the Slavic heartland of Kiev and Rus, the Russian Federation, and Belarus. And to me, this is absolutely against the principles of territorial integrity, independence, and sovereignty that NATO holds dear, and that Ukraine holds dear. It is obviously fighting for its life at this moment. And for that reason, I think it's so important that NATO continue its strong and consistent assistance to Ukraine. NATO is not heading for retirement at this moment. In fact, it is back to a severe requirement to defend and deter against potential Russian aggression in Europe. And for that reason, I would say NATO is now more vital than ever.
But the big challenge now, and marking your 75th anniversary, is how to Trump-proof support for Ukraine. What does that look like?
I've been interested to watch the foreign ministers meeting in the last few days because it seems to me the alliance is taking an important step in removing from the ad hoc process. It's called the Ramstein process because it was centered at Ramstein Air Force Base in Germany, to get individual NATO member states to sign up to assist Ukraine with various programs of assistance, whether tanks and armored personnel carriers or different kinds of and calibers of munitions. Individual NATO member states were coming together in that way under the leadership of the United States, but now I think it makes sense to move from that more or less ad hoc process to an institutional process that would be headquartered at NATO. It still will be led by an American. The Supreme Allied Commander Europe, SACEUR, will still lead the process, but it will now have an institutional home. And in that way, it will not suffer the issues that more informal and ad hoc processes can experience, shall I say.
And presumably the issues of who may be the president of the United States.
Well, indeed, one can't decide ahead of time what the outcome of a free and fair election will be. So there are two candidates, clearly, President Biden and Donald Trump. So we will only know next November who the next president of the United States will be. But I do think in any event that having an ad hoc process turn into an institutional process with a more well-established structure to it makes a good deal of sense.
Yeah. Also, in essence, NATO is moving towards a position where it's planning for a future in which the US doesn't necessarily underwrite Europe's defense.
Well, to be honest with you, I think already the United States has underwritten European defense in the way it has invested heavily, including in recent years and including under the Trump administration, the first Trump administration, in infrastructure improvements in Europe so that NATO Europe can be reinforced should Russian aggression require it. So the United States has put more troops in Europe. It has built up new facilities and put in place pre-positioned stocks of equipment and materiel. So I think the United States is heavily invested in NATO. Now, might that investment fall off in future years? It is possible, but I do want to say that the investment so far has been considerable.
Clearly, the biggest challenge right now facing NATO is how to support Ukraine, how to ensure its victory over President Putin. I mean, Russia poured endless scorn on NATO, saying it's got no place in the modern world. It's accused Western leaders of returning to what Putin described as a Cold War mindset. What would your response be to that?
To me, it looks like the Russian president has returned to a medieval mindset in wanting to recreate the Slavic heartland of Kiev and Rus, the Russian Federation, and Belarus. And to me, this is absolutely against the principles of territorial integrity, independence, and sovereignty that NATO holds dear, and that Ukraine holds dear. It is obviously fighting for its life at this moment. And for that reason, I think it's so important that NATO continue its strong and consistent assistance to Ukraine.
Yeah. How confident are you that Ukraine will secure that victory?
I've been impressed with how well the Ukrainians are doing with their indigenous capabilities. They are really skilled missileers. You know, back during the Soviet era, they built the big intercontinental ballistic missiles of the Soviet Union, the SS-18 and the SS-24. Now they're building much smaller drones and cruise missiles and ballistic missiles, but very capable, very accurate, and they have done a great job in establishing control of the Black Sea and really driving the Russian Navy to the eastern Black Sea. So Ukraine has been able to use its indigenous capabilities to good advantage in this fight, but they do need assistance to be able to keep it up, and particularly air defense, because the Russians are pounding them. The Russians also are very good at building missiles, and they are pounding them, including with some long-range ballistic missiles,
And
evidently purchased from North Korea.
what does that assistance look like right now and then for the long term?
I see in the reporting out of the NATO foreign ministers meeting that NATO is going to look hard for additional Patriot missile defense capabilities to provide to Ukraine. And I think that should be absolutely the top priority. Missile defense, air and missile defense assistance of all kinds to Ukraine has to be the top priority at this moment. The problem, of course, is that NATO itself hasn't been producing missile defense interceptors at scale. So really that's on NATO's shoulders to up its level of defense production, again, for critical systems like the Patriot.
Rose, we're speaking on the 75th anniversary of the formation of NATO. And I think when it was formed, probably the people deciding what NATO was going to look like, what role it was going to fulfill, didn't realize how crucial it would be 75 years later. What is the long-term plan for the alliance? Do you see it being in existence in the same way for the next 75 years?
Well, in any event, NATO stands for peace and security and stability in Europe. It is a defensive alliance. It is all about deterrence of aggression and defense. And so I do see a role for NATO going forward in continuing to secure security and stability for all allies, including, of course, the United States and Canada in North America. It's the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So I do see a continuing role for NATO, but I hope it won't always be in the teeth of this hot aggression that was spurred by the Russian invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022. I think it would be best for all concerned, including for Russia itself, to return to a stable and peaceful situation on the European continent.
Rose Gottemoeller, thank you so much. Former Deputy Secretary General of NATO, I really appreciate your time.
My pleasure.